Welcome to Hindustan Times. My name is Jayashree Nandi. I write on environmental issues for HT. And today we have with us Swati Singh Sambyal. She's a waste management expert with UN Habitat, United Nations Human Settlements Program. And Swati has over a decade of work on waste management and resource efficiency related issues. Today, Swati is going to speak to us about the circular economy. The government has a circular economy program, which is all about resource efficiency and minimizing waste. But what does it mean in our lives to implement, these concepts? Is what Swati is going to tell us. Welcome, Swati.
Thank you so much, Jayashree, for having me over, and really glad to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, Swati. Okay, Swati, so circular economy sounds a bit difficult and complicated. What does it actually mean?
To put it simply, it clearly is not complicated at all. And before I even talk about circular economy, it's even important to understand the kind of times that we are living in today, which is quite linear. So presently in our current economy, we're taking materials from the earth, making products out of them, and eventually we are throwing them away as waste. And the process is linear. We aren't reusing those resources. In a circular economy, simply put, we stop waste being produced in the first place. And it's majorly woven around some principles, one being eliminating waste and pollution. Second, circulating products and materials at their highest value, which means look at your mobile as an example. You use it, so you prolong its use for the longest time. But when you're done with it and you shift to a newer model, perhaps this mobile of yours is being reused by someone, or it gets repaired and refurbished and then gets reused, or it goes into a recycling value chain and then further gets made into a newer mobile. And third, regenerate nature. And why circular economy is important in the present times? Because it will eventually help us tackle some major global challenges, one being climate change. I think we all are grappling with it, biodiversity lost, and foremost, waste and pollution.
So, Swati, Indians have been probably implementing this sort of a lifestyle all along, simply because we are in terms of resources, we do not have, our consumption patterns are very efficient, and we have a tendency to reuse many products. So how else can we sort of improve on this and use it more consciously? What are your thoughts on that?
As you said rightly, Jayashree, we are not new to circular economy. As a country, I think it has been practiced for ages, be it the barter system that we've seen in households where you exchange your old textile clothes for utensils, or be it a kabadiwala that comes to your house and you give all your recyclable waste to him, and then he further gets, it's sent off for recycling. So I think these are some age-old practices that have been, carried forward for generations to come. And of course, these very much fit into circular practices. Or be it the vast informal waste recycling sector, who have been operational in our cities, for eons. And they are like millions and billions of workers who not only manage the waste, but also ensure that it goes for recycling. Like there is a end chain, where all this material is going to. But clearly, one thing that we need to understand is that when we talk about circular economy, it not only means recycling. It not only means sending resources to recycling. If we need to really optimize it, I think first of all and foremost, we need to minimize consumption. We have to be really conscious about our consumption. Secondly, we need to relook into prolonging the use of materials. For instance, it's very easy nowadays to switch from one version of mobile to a version 2 to a version 3, and that happens by the year. I bought a fridge last year and I asked the store manager, what is its life and what is its after sale value, and he was like, well, it would just be reduced to 1/4. So presently, I think products aren't designed for prolonged use, or the average life is like max 4 or 5 years. You buy a TV, you buy any electronic, and ask, I don't know how many times we ask that question, but majorly, most of the products that are designed, they're not for prolonged use. So I think if you really need to optimize circularity in our day-to-day lives, we first need to have a minimalistic, attitude towards living a life, which means assessing whatever we have, is it enough? And if we need more, why we need more? Secondly, prolonging the use of products. And I think that work has to happen at the back end, wherein companies take enough, contribute enough in ensuring that the products that they manufacture, they have a prolonged use, or they also have refurbishing and repair programs, which in the present context are not there. There are repair cafes, a wonderful cafe concept that has come up in Bangalore, where you could go and repair your, utensils or electronics. But this is not widespread, the repair culture with electronics. Third, looking into refurbishing items. We don't really see refurbishing or repair shops anymore. I mean, of course, it could be there for textiles where you have a tailor sitting outside, but on an average, for many, many companies, you don't see it. And last, if nothing is of use at all, for instance, it cannot be reused, it cannot be passed on, it cannot be repaired or refurbished, then it could go for recycling. So clearly, recycling is the last ladder, but reusing, minimization, prolonging the use of products, and ensuring that even if they are faulty, they can be repaired, I think is probably the true principle, which if people adopt, it could be a game changer on the ground.
Yeah, a related question to this. Now, the government has notified a prohibition on single-use plastics, on various products that are made with single-use plastics. And we now also have extended producer responsibility for plastic packaging producers, importers, brands. So how do you think this is going to play out? And if not single-use plastic, I think we've discussed this several times, what are the alternatives for people? For example, if I'm using a cloth bag, many a times, it can get wet. I may not be able to use it. So there are various logistical issues. And how do you see this, sort of working out in the coming years, starting this year?
I think for the regulation on single-use plastic, I mean, about time we had it, and of course it's a good step because we are closing the tap here. There is a ban on manufacture, import, distribution, stocking, and sale of some major single-use plastic contaminants. However, as you rightly said, we need to be equally mindful of the alternatives that we'll bring into the table. So we are saying we're banning a carry bag. Okay, what is the alternative? It's a cloth bag or a jute bag. So let's look at the social, economic, and environmental viability of these alternatives. Socially, I mean, whether all income groups can buy it, because clearly plastics comes at a much, much cheaper rate. It's just a few paisa as compared to a few rupees for a cloth bag or a jute bag. Environment viability. Is it more polluting? Is it less polluting? And then the economic viability, whether everyone can buy it or not. So I think we really need to look into these three factors while assessing a list of alternatives now that will come into picture. I mean, yesterday itself, CPCB has released a pamphlet talking about a ban of some major SUP items starting July 2022. I think my bigger worry is what would be the alternatives that will be put on the table. And once these alternatives are, put there out in the market, what would be their collection modalities? So what would we take them as? Wet waste, dry waste? Should we bring a separate category of segregation? But then there's a complication on the ground, even with segregation, even wet, dry, and domestic hazardous waste, we're not able to do in a very efficient manner. So I think there are some threats. Of course, the regulation is good, about time it happened, but then we really need clear guidelines and a clear picture on the alternatives that we use. While some are very easy to switch to. So as you said, cloth bags, of course, they have a prolonged use. It's not that you have to buy cloth bags again and again and again. But look at some of the online portals that presently are dispatching food and grocery supplies. Now, the bags that come, they're really low quality bags. So even if you want to use them, they won't last even for 3-4 days. Which means just to ensure or meet the obligation of not using plastic carry bags, they have switched to very low quality bags, which I'm not sure are they even cloth bags or what material it is. So I think we really need to also monitor, the compliance assurance, whether it's being met in the true spirit or it's not being met, because clearly there'll be a lot of defaulters once this comes into picture. So I think a clear analysis of alternatives, a clear guidelines in place for alternatives, and also clear awareness. There is a project going on in South Delhi. It's called Project Vikalp, wherein a lot of grocery stores, a lot of vegetable markets, a lot of commercial complexes are being educated on why they should switch to cloth bags. And again, it's designed as a barter system. So if I, as a customer, am not carrying a bag, the commercial shop owner can lend me a cotton bag for 10 rupees, and I have the freedom to take it back, not return the cloth bag again. And if I do, I get my 10 rupees back. So I think it's quite innovative, and there is a chance of associating with civic society, voluntary organizations, RWAs, and work together to ensure there's enough awareness about alternatives. And foremost, that awareness leads to behavior change, because currently people are aware there is a single-use plastic ban, and I'm sure everyone knows about it. But when it comes to implementation, I think because of lack of an awareness or lack of right information, I think the implementation, always lags behind.
And the capital costs, I mean, the cost of making these products. So it's obviously cheaper to have like hundreds of thin plastic bags, and you just, give it away. In fact, the vegetable vendor gives it to me, like, even if I say I don't want it, he sort of shoves, just take it and go away. So this is going to be a huge cost to the producers. Even if you look at certain foods, like yesterday I got something and I got it in a terracotta cup, packaging. So that would cost far higher than a plastic, container. So how do you think producers can sort of meet or ensure that they meet these requirements for the higher capital cost to transition to a more circular kind of economy?
Yeah, I mean, definitely plastic is there almost everywhere because it is much cheaper than any other material. But for cloth, there could be still a solution. I think in a lot of cities there have been initiatives where households have been asked to probably donate or give their textiles which they don't use. Could be bed sheets, could be curtains, and then they are further linked to cooperatives or NGOs or self-help groups who would make cloth bags out of it. So I think that situation is still a bit sorted, where you don't have to use new cotton bags. I don't think so it's happening rampantly, wherein newer cotton bags are being manufactured. It's mostly advocated on reusing old textile waste, cleaning it, washing it, and then sort of making bags out of it. But for a host of other material, I'm sure, the moment you switch to an alternative, the cost gets increased. But if you compare the environmental cost of plastics vis-a-vis the environmental cost of an alternative like a terracotta or a cotton, I'm sure plastic tops and the other items are much lesser, unless and until you throw them or discard them or are not storing them properly. So clearly there, we are weighing it more in terms of the environmental cost, because presently, if you see waste management across cities, and one of the major contaminants that is polluting the environment, and of course, plastics, there are a host of other material for sure, but plastics and single-use plastics and packaging waste, it sort of tops the charts, because They have really low value, so they don't get picked up, they don't get recycled. I'm not saying that they're not recyclable. If they're clean and washed, there are presently technologies available which upcycle MLPs, which upcycle plastic packaging material and sheets. But for a waste worker to pick it up and then to store kgs and kgs of it and then finally sell it, it would hardly fetch him 2 to 3 rupees per kg, vis-a-vis PET bottles or HTP or LTP that will fetch him 40 to 50 rupees per kg. So I think it's also about the economics of recycling, and which items fetch higher value, which eventually get picked up, and which items have very low value, and for a picker or a collector or a worker, it's not worth all the effort. So clearly, I mean, on the ground, if we still want to continue with some plastic materials that still will be there for times to come, it's important to strengthen their collection modalities and ensure that they end up for recycling, and then further those pellets could be reutilized to make plastic material again. But if we switch to alternatives again, we need to have similar systems in place, as you rightly said, that they could still pollute, so a spoiled paper bag or a spoiled cloth bag, which you can't use for a long time, or a terracotta pot which gets broken. All of these materials would still end in your bin. So what plans we have for their recycling or for their reuse or for their repair, if so. So I think looking at a bigger picture, wherein we look at different products as resources and look into their reutilization, channelization and their recycling and their reuse. I think looking at every material from that lens is very important, not just looking at, well, okay, plastic is a problem, so let's introduce a host of alternatives. But then at the same time, you need to create mechanisms and modalities for those alternatives as well. Otherwise, we may just introduce newer problems for us.
Sure. Even in the climate negotiations, Swati, now India is trying to position itself as a country with a sustainable lifestyle, with very efficient consumption patterns, because our per capita emissions are also far lower than many Western countries. So you must have heard that Prime Minister Modi has referred to this concept of lifestyle for environment, where we are talking about how efficient our consumption patterns are, and hence our emissions are lower. So do you think, how can this be implemented? When you're talking to an average person, what would your recommendation be as to what kind of lifestyle tweaks, changes can be made so that our consumption patterns are lower and probably our footprint is also lower?
I think, as you mentioned, we definitely need to create changes in our microenvironments as individuals, as families, as households, as business owners, as producers, manufacturers, whatever entity or whatever stakeholder you are. Collective action is the need of the hour. And if we are not changing our behavior, our habits, of course, the threats that we are facing in the times to come, there's no end to it. And it's clearly a time where, we used to say, well, it's now or never after 2030, but presently we're living in a time wherein small changes to your life, if you're not making it now, there's clearly a never. What each one of us could do, I think some very everyday, small actions, be it saving electricity or water, generating less waste, minimizing your consumption, or more than that, being mindful about what you consume, or thinking 5 steps ahead, like if you bought something, like what could be the action if I just dispose it, if I switch to a newer item. So I think being mindful of our consumption or having extended consumer responsibility is even more important, because consumers derive the markets. I genuinely feel that if we demand for sustainable products, there will be a change in the market. And we have seen it in many ways, small things. So we can influence change, and we can influence the market. We can influence the entire supply demand value chain. So clearly minimizing our footprint is the need of the hour. Small actions like, if you want to buy a car, well, choose for an electric model over a fossil fuel car, or why not look into urban gardening or urban farming over just growing gardens. So I think it's these are some very small steps that an individual at household level or at any level could take, to sort of contribute to the environment. You really don't have to join a movement or an NGO or an organization. I think in your everyday actions, you can reflect all these changes and, contribute to the bigger cause, which is saving the planet.
I think, Swati, I've asked you this question several times as to why we are not able to segregate waste at home. I'll give you a few examples. Like, some friends have told me that there are no composters available, or if composters are available for the wet waste, they're very, very expensive. And there's probably one or two companies who are producing these composters. What is stopping people from segregating waste? What are your thoughts on that?
I think about time. I mean, segregation is mandatory. I think that entire debate that we're having, why is anyone not segregating? So I would say that as per SWM rules, the Solid Waste Management Rules 2016, every generator, whether at household level or a bulk level, has to segregate at source. It is mandatory. It's not optional. Again, I mean, there are some flaws within the systems, and that clearly need to be meant so that everyone does that. The fundamental issue being that there is enough awareness about it, as you rightly said. Like, people will give you their reasons of why they're not being able to do it. But the thing is, we have to acknowledge the fact that people know about it. That, well, okay, you have to do it as per the city's bylaws or as per the city's rules. But a bigger issue is that awareness has not yet converted into a habit or behavior change. So clearly, prolonged awareness campaigns, or I would say, for instance, in Delhi, there's so many resident welfare societies. Why can't they play a lead role in influencing householders to segregate at source? So clearly, I feel we need more stringent actions on the ground now. About time. I think we've been too soft on just creating awareness on segregation, but at RWA level or at household level, at micro level, housing societies, commercial complexes, they all need to come together to make this happen. For instance, as something as simple as do not collect if a household is not segregating. I'm sure after 3 or 4 days, they will start, or issue challans or warnings. I mean, about time this happens. If you talk about Delhi bylaws, it gives the authority, and it's talked about decentralization of powers, wherein a collector can issue challans to a household if they are not segregating at source. So I think about time this happens. Of course, this is put many a times on notices, but I think people really, when if you're not complying, you need to pay a penalty or you need to be fined. So I think with respect to segregation, that part needs to happen. Monitoring needs to happen. It's not happening at all. There's no one doing rounds and checking whether households segregated waste or not. So clearly a decentralization of powers, where probably a ward zone inspector can go check what is the level of households segregation, whether his collectors are collecting waste in a segregated manner, or if households are defaulting, then issue them challans. I think it's very clear. And it is happening in cities. We talk about the Indore model as the cleanest city in the country. Well, clearly because it's adopted a carrot and stick model. The municipality is really strict about segregation to start with. And then, of course, the city has created systems to support segregation. While in a city like Delhi, we are still struggling with the first round, which is ensuring residents segregate. So I think it's high time corporations, authorities, households, or all stakeholders involved in the waste value chain understand that, well, your waste is resource only if you segregate it. If you're not doing it, clearly, it will be a mess to deal with. And then you'll definitely, plan centralized systems. Well, how do we deal with mixed waste? Okay, let's get waste to energy. Let's get a centralized plant in place. So if you segregate, I think you also make way for decentralized models. You also make way for supporting livelihoods who are there in the waste value chain. And we've clearly seen this in many good examples and case studies of cities. So there's no way out of it. I feel it is mandatory and high time we even start debating about it, why it's not happening. It has to happen at any cost. And I feel relevant authorities and stakeholders have to either put in pressure or, as I mentioned, like adopt a incentive or a disincentive modality, if this is not complied to.
So your last thoughts, Swati, on reuse. I think in India, we have this kind of an inhibition about reusing certain things. It also happens culturally where you do not want to reuse clothes often, and there's, some taboo attached to reusing many things. So how do you think, it can be sort of, how can you make people inspired to reduce their consumption and reuse products that they already have at home? What are your last thoughts on that?
I think we've as a country and culturally, we've always swapped clothes, or we've always swapped items, right? With families, within households, with our cousins. That I think that culture has always been there. So about time we mainstream it. Something as simple as thrift shops or swap shops, which in the West are very common. You want to buy something, there's also like a flea market or a swap or a thrift market where you could just go and buy n number of items, and of course they're at much cheaper rate. So I think it's about time that we mainstream that. It's very much mainstreamed on social handles right now. Like Instagram has a range of accounts where you can thrift, where you can barter. I do it personally with a few friends, and so I think we really need to mainstream the reuse culture, be it in our policies, be it in our actions, be it in our everyday life, and normalize it. I think presently our notion that, well, for everything that you need to go to a shop or you need to buy it. But what if we sort of normalize the fact that if I need something, well, can I call a friend? Well, do you have a spare? Or if we are of the same size, can I borrow it from you? So I think about time we sort of normalize this culture. It will not happen instantly. It used to be there for decades. I think in present 10, 20 years, we've somehow lost touch, and cities predominantly are influenced by mall culture. So how do we sort of normalize it, and more than reuse, using local products, that habit of probably buying directly from a farm or directly buying from, like farm to table concepts. So how do we sort of mainstream it? Of course, it happens in very affluent circles as of now. So about time that we normalize all these things and talk more about it, write more about it, create more awareness about it. And one thing that I feel that most of the times we are living in an era of information where everything is probably just a mobile away. You just need to sort of search it. So I think normalizing reuse culture is more important. I don't know if anyone knows about the importance of reuse, but how do we normalize it is probably a bigger debate. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Swati. This was very, very useful, and also exciting times coming ahead because of the single-use plastic prohibition, also the circular economy concept, and various other schemes coming forward in terms of resource efficiency. So this is very useful. Thank you so much, Swati. Thanks for your time.
Jayashree, it was really nice, having this important conversation with you, and my pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot.